We are the people of Mercury. I am your interplanetary host, Travis Montgomery. These views reflect one planet and one planet alone. This is Mercury's Cast, and I am your host, Travis Montgomery. We've been off for a while, but we plan to be back on the reg. Just some stuff going on my side of town, my side of the country, Alex's side of the country. But we are here to tell you that we plan on doing episodes more frequently from here on out until the end of eternity, for as long as we can do it, at least. Maybe. There might be a couple other projects in the works. It's just been a little hectic over here for me. I'm really excited to talk about this guest that we have today. And first, let's just get this aggravating part out of the way. Alexander, how are you doing?
I'm doing swell.
What's new with you? You got a new pet? Tell us about it real quickly before we introduce our guest.
Well, I moved 2,000 miles east and I got me a possum.
That pretty much sums it up very quickly. So now, without further delay, John Carter is our guest. How are you doing today? I know it took just a tad bit longer than we wanted to. 10 minutes past our live time is actually pretty good for us. But how are you doing today?
Good. I'm doing excellent. Thank you.
Right on. Well, first we'd like to get a tech segment out of the way, just because we are kind of dorks like that in that world. Before we dive into what is your policing career and what you're trying to do right now. So Tesla had another crash, and just chit-chatting with John before this, he told me he might even be doing some business with Tesla. So Tesla had a crash, and Elon Musk posted a tweet. Alexander, can you bring that up for me while I try to babble on a little bit? Are you able to bring that up? Because I sent it to you.
You sent me a tweet? Since when?
Yeah, I sent you a screenshot of a tweet. Anyways, Elon Musk was talking about they had another self-driving car crash, which is usually human error, and we like to demonize these self-driving cars for some reason.
I've got it.
I don't really get it. You want to read it for us?
Yeah. Elon Musk posted to Twitter. I don't see it, but he said, "It's super messed up that a Tesla crash resulting in a broken ankle is front page news, and the 40,000 people who died in U.S. auto accidents alone in the past year got almost no coverage."
That's a little bit strange, don't you think? John, do you got an opinion on that one?
Well, I can understand why he might say what he's saying, but I think the difference here is that when you're testing cars that's supposed to be self-driving, you expect that the automation of the car would avoid the same type of human error or human mistakes that people make. And that's why they want to press this technology, because they want to show folks that, hey, if you rely on this self-driving technology, it's going to minimize accidents, it's going to minimize injury. But if that isn't the case, then folks are going to question why do it. However, when Tesla and these other companies come out with this technology, they're not saying that it's going to be perfect and there won't be incidents or mishaps. They're just saying that their technology use will be safer.
And I'm honestly a lot more curious, particularly journalists who are posting on their social media feeds about this sort of thing. I'd be interested, one, to see the statistics, how many cars Tesla has on the road, how many of them have been accidents, in a comparison to the average driver, to see if they are safer or less safe. Just curious about that. And the other interesting bit is I think people still drive Priuses. and Toyotas in general. And wasn't it them that had the massive recall on their accelerators getting stuck and slamming people into other people at like 90 miles an hour?
Well, I think
that
those
was
are the Toyota cars.
Hey, John, get a little closer to wherever the microphone is on your laptop, or just speak a little bit louder so the audience can hear you better, please.
Sure. I think that that Toyota was a company that had the cars that had the accelerators to stick. But as I said, a lot of these companies that come out with the technology that they come out with, not saying that it's going to be flawless, but it's just saying that it's going to be safer. But see, what happens is that the news, because they need this to get ratings, they need to sell newspapers or whatever, they'll take one or two incidents out of thousands and they'll focus on the weaknesses in those one or two incidents and not talk about the thousands that happen on a weekly or monthly basis.
Doesn't automobiles accidents count for like the third most deaths other than heart related issues? And it's up there other than cancer and like heart related issues. Isn't automobile deaths like up there on the list pretty high?
Yeah.
Let me look.
Okay, thank you, Eric. You guys can hear. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, well, it is. But you also have to know that drivers come from all types of backgrounds and ages. Like, for example, in Nebraska, a kid can drive as young as 14, not 16, because if he lives in a rural community and his school is more than, 4 or 5 miles away, 3 or 4 miles away, a child who's 14 can get a provisional operator's license to actually operate a motor vehicle to drive to school every day and to work if they have a job. But at 14, they probably are not working, but they can operate a motor vehicle. And when you put a person of that impressionable, tender age behind a vehicle with that much power, and if they don't have good judgment or if they are under a lot of peer influence, anything can happen. And you have to remember that teenagers account for a great number of those injuries and fatalities.
Correct. Yeah, I would have to say that I would trust a self-driving car way more than I would trust a teen something texting and driving, or just with a cell phone in the vehicle.
Well, it's a double whammy, really, because working in and around cars, in the experiences I have, I think most people I've seen drive away from pumps, with it still in their car, are full-grown adults staring at their cell phones, trying to figure out how to work the Instagrams.
Right.
And I think every demographic is hit, but I think the most important thing is distracted driving.
That is very
and
true.
it affects us all. And I think the autopilot, at the very least, I've noticed a lot of companies coming out with assisted auto, or not a total autopilot, but just assist, like braking assistance, help keep you from slamming into things. And I'm sure there's certain safety issues with that as well. But I think ultimately, I don't think anyone in the media has done the research, statistics for statistics, unaided driving versus self-driving cars, and the actual percentage of accidents per vehicle. I don't think the numbers have actually been an unbiased and independent source. So I think most of what we're seeing, the flak-headed Tesla's way, is uninformed. But I've been in Teslas. I think they're amazing cars, and I might be a little biased myself.
They're a work of art. They're a work of engineering art, in my opinion.
They are.
I think it'd be best for. Let's do a recap on this, because I actually do the research and figure out what the exact comparison would be for similar powered automobiles. So vehicles with similar amounts of torque and horsepower compared overall accident rates versus the autopiloted Tesla. I think that'd be an interesting comparison.
I don't think it'd be even close. Trying to get
Total fender benders, all that. Minor accidents. I don't know that there have been any major accidents involved.
There was one where Tesla killed a girl in Arizona, but there was a homeless lady who was crazy and ran right out in front of the street. It was pretty much an unavoidable accident. It's kind of been a black eye on the Tesla community. I happen to agree with. I think Elon Musk is doing great things. There's people that like to hate on him. I can see where you can have an argument on him taking money from the government, but other than that, I mean, I'd trust the private sector way more than I do for most government agencies.
That's my key gripe with them, though, is that they do take government money, and I think it should be a private company should be private. But that's getting into some minute detail. I think a majority of what Elon Musk
is there a light you can turn on in your room?
I'm not.
Are you hiding? Are you hiding from somebody? Are you hiding from someone?
We got Mr. Popo on the line. I can't hang.
I mean, we're coming through just great. Well, maybe turn the video off anyway. All right, we're going to get on to some stuff now. So, Mr. John Carter.
Yes.
Where'd you grow up, and what was your sibling and family life like? Did you have two parents growing up, and what school did you go to in college and all that? Can just whiz by that real fast.
Oh yeah, well, I was born and raised in Mobile, Alabama. So it's the last city in Alabama that you can get to before you hit the Gulf Coast. And I had three brothers that I grew up with. My mom and dad, raised me. They eventually divorced, but then they got back together again. So pretty much they had been in the house and around most of my time growing up. Later in high school, going to college, they were both together the whole time. I attended, Tuskegee Institute, which was what it was called back then in Alabama. After I had left Xavier University in New Orleans, I eventually ended up at Creighton in Omaha to finish a law degree, and then went to the Thomas Jefferson School of Law to work on an LLM, which is a Master's in Laws and Taxation.
Wow. So that's very impressive. Just real quick, is that where the Tuskegee Airmen came from? I'm guessing it is.
Yes, it is. And what I had done is when I was in Omaha, I became a co-owner of a flight school called Flight Nebraska Group, which decided to disband, shortly after I got there. They were retired Air Force pilots. But at the North Omaha Airport, I actually started an organization called Tuskegee Aviation. And one of the things that we tried to do was get the first African-American female pilot licensed as a private pilot in Nebraska, because in its history, Nebraska has never licensed a black female pilot ever has been licensed in the state of Nebraska to fly. And that's just unheard of. But there are a lot of firsts in Nebraska. Things like in the agency, in the county that I'm working right now, I'm the first black, deputy sheriff. I was the first black officer.
Population of Nebraska is like 1,000, isn't it?
Say that again, Alex.
The population of Nebraska is like 10 people, though.
No, actually,
they've got a small population.
Outside of Lincoln and I guess Omaha.
Well, you'll be surprised. There are other cities in Nebraska like North Platte, Grand Island, Hastings. There are cities like Oahu, Holdridge, Yeah, I'm a cook. So there are.
of me outside of where Nebraska.
Alex, you're not coming through at all.
Nowhere,
Hardly, barely right now.
Yeah, see the
I
main.
said I'm in nowhere, Nebraska.
Okay, now you're good.
Yep. So the main populated areas in Nebraska will be Omaha and Lincoln. Those are the most two populated cities in the state. That is correct. But they are not the only populated places in the city. They are the largest by far, but they're not the only. But that's a misconception that people have, because when you look at it on the map, you'll see two dots of the major cities. You see Omaha and Lincoln, and that's it. The rest of it's just wide open.
Correct. So I actually have family in Mobile, Alabama, or at least I did. They were Montgomerys too. I went there one time when I was 6 with my grandma. They made me peel peas or something. Well, they had a farm, and they made me peel the split peas or the, I don't know what I was doing, but they're like, hey, while you're here, you might as well.
So I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective to our listeners. The population of Los Angeles is roughly like 4 million people. The population of the entire state of Nebraska is about 2 million people.
It's about what?
Well,
2
million people total in Nebraska. About
right.
4 million total in the city of Los Angeles.
Well, yeah, LA's
let me speak to that. You know what? But let me tell you something very, very interesting about that.
Get closer to your mic if you can, John, please.
All right. All right. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Here, let me turn this up some.
Yes.
All right. Now, see, let me bring that into a little bit of perspective for you, Alexander, and that is, notice that most people, especially folks of color, are always pushed to live in highly populated areas like Los Angeles, San Diego, Dallas, Houston, and areas like that. You'll find that taxes are high.
I've noticed.
Alex?
All right. You'll find that the taxes are high. The cost of living is a bit of a struggle sometimes, unless you're pretty educated or some type of entrepreneur. And folks live by a lot of rules. I mean, they live by a lot of rules every day. Now, in the smaller communities, and I just want you to think about something. In the smaller communities, there are a lot of folks that will get together and move into cities that are 5,000 people or less. And you'll even find some that are only like 2,500. I've lived and worked in several that are only about 2,500, 2,600.
Do you mind if I tell you the population of where I live right now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Population 990.
Right. Now, look at the
990 people. We're not incorporated at all. It's not even a city.
Right, but some small communities like that populate, because you know what they do? They grow their food, they make their city ordinances, they become incorporated, so they're their own cities.
We just make bass boats.
And they regulate.
We just make bass boats.
And they regulate themselves. And what those folks usually become are patriot communities, and they despise a lot of federal government interference in their day-to-day affairs. They really do. Because if something were to happen in this country, I guarantee you that it's the smaller communities that are growing their own food.
There's no question about that.
Yeah, they are going to be able to survive and move on, rather than the folks in the cities that are going to be scrambling for some kind of protection.
Travis didn't tell you my background, did he?
No.
I'm what's known as a capitalist. So I believe in total severance of the federal government.
Until you need them.
Individualism, capitalism. Nah, I think the free market can handle itself, at least on a national level. I don't know about a state or a local level, but I think that's the importance right now.
Let's get back on track. I want to go back through the timeline. So Creighton is a really like a high university, isn't it? It's pretty
Yeah,
exciting.
Creighton is actually the sister school to Harvard. A lot of people don't know that.
So yeah, first off, I just want to say that I'm impressed by the discipline and the work that it takes to do something like that, because I never had that kind of gene or that kind of drive. Probably came from being raised right. Can you agree to that, or are you one of the? It didn't sound like you came from like a terrible family or.
No, I didn't come from a terrible family, but I came from a family that struggled. My family grew up I grew up initially in a housing project. I mean, we were on welfare, and we were on social programs until my mom went back to school, got a bachelor's degree, and she got a job with the USDA as a marine biologist, and she finally went to work for the Food and Drug Administration doing shellfish research. And she did that job for 28 years. And then she retired as a marine biologist doing shellfish research for the Food and Drug Administration.
Oh, and so that's how she was able, you guys were able to get kind of above that poverty line because of.
Right. So
wait, hold on. You said she was doing selfish research. So was research all for herself, or? I'm just kidding. No. I'm just kidding. Shellfish, selfish. I gotta throw one in there every once in a while. No, so that's good. That's great. You know, that took some discipline and some good decision making for your mom to go back to school in order to do that for your guys' family. That's wonderful, I think. And so after that, you guys were able to move out of the projects.
Right, exactly. So what my mom did is after she got that job, maybe 6 months later, she bought a house, and she was the only person in the family, in our nuclear family, and her nuclear family, really that actually purchased her own home. And so from about 7 years old until I became a grown man and left home, my mom always lived in her own house that she bought. She was no longer a renter. She never did go back to renting a house.
That's cool, man. So fast forward. So you entered the military yourself, right?
Yeah. I went into the military. I joined the Marine Corps. I initially joined the reserves, but I had got a job at the sheriff's office in New Orleans, and I worked down with the sheriff's office in New Orleans Police Department in the early 80s. But back during that time, the New Orleans Police Department, unbeknownst to me until I became a member among their ranks and files, were one of the most corrupt departments in the country. And they ran all the drugs and all the prostitution in New Orleans.
Wait, hold on. I think you sped by that a little too fast. Just run that by me one more time, because if I didn't catch it the first time, I'm sure somebody else that's listening did not catch it. Go again and just lay it all on us again, because that is some shit right there. Yeah,
look, when I joined the sheriff's department, it was called the Orleans Criminal Sheriff's Office. Charles C. Fody was the sheriff during that time. And there were several New Orleans police officers that I worked with. Well, one of the things that I didn't know, because I had joined the sheriff's office after leaving, Tuskegee, Institute in Tuskegee, Alabama. So I went from college to that. That was the first real job that I had. And so actually it was the second real job that I had. But anyway, during my training program, there was a field training officer I was riding with. His name was Kevin, and Kevin was kind of showing me the ropes. And one of the things he did, he took me around to the housing projects, and he said, "Look, let me show you what the day-to-day profiling that an officer has to look out for." I hate to interrupt you. Was this New Orleans being a part of the police squad before or after the military? No, this was prior to the military.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. So
Sure.
this is prior to. So when Kevin showed me the ropes, he said a police officer should never be hungry, horny, or bored, right? So what happened was there was a kid, he was probably about 16, 17 years old. He stopped him and he shook him down, what we call a shakedown. He shook him down. The kid had money on him. The kid had about $5,000 or $6,000 in his pocket. He had some little drugs on him. So Kevin took the drugs. He took his foot and crumbled him down into the ground and kicked him into a sewer that was close by. And it was he kind of warned the kid, you shouldn't be out here doing this. You should go back to school, blah, blah, blah. But then the money that he took off the kid, it was around almost $6,000. He put it in a little brown paper bag, he put it on the front seat of the car, and we left. At the end of the shift, you usually turn in your radio, turn in your shotgun, you turn in any property that you found or confiscated from suspects. And he turned in everything except that bag of money that was under the seat. So I asked him, I said, hey, what happened to that bag of money we had under the seat? And he said, what money? And I was like, what do you mean? He said, what money? Man. He said, you didn't see us take any money. So I went and told my Sergeant Brent, who was our, watch sergeant. After everything was done, I went to his office and said, hey, I saw something today, kind of troubled me a little bit. And I explained to him what happened. And Sergeant Brent said, let me tell you something, little Carter. He said, you need to learn that there's a blue code around here. He said, one thing you never, ever do is knock out a fellow officer for anything that happens on the street. He said, that's the easiest way to lose your life around here. And I said, really? Wow. Yeah. And so, there were a couple other things that happened because while I was I was there for about 3 years, and I saw that there were officers that kind of crossed the line or they crossed the one. They would get sent to a call, like it was usually some kind of domestic, where the officer would be ambushed, severely injured or killed. And as I stayed, I learned that the drugs and the prostitution in the city were run by the police department. So that's when I decided that I had to get out. So I joined the Marine Corps full time, and I left about a year and a half, maybe 2 years after I left.
Shitballs.
The FBI, they infiltrated the New Orleans Police Department, and most of the watch commanders, even that I worked for, all those guys went to prison. A lot of those officers went to prison.
Well, good.
The FBI went in and they cleaned up the New Orleans Police Department and that sheriff's office.
It was like a real life reenactment of that movie Training Day. I'm sure you've seen that one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did that bring back some similar feelings watching what's that, Ethan Hawke go through some of those things?
Yeah, and he was going through something. I'm telling you, man, because even to this day, because the FBI did a report some years ago that some law enforcement officers are really not qualified to be law enforcement officers. I mean, even though
we're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into that one too. But I'm sorry to interrupt, but go ahead.
Yeah, because even though they say all this psychological training and all this stuff that they go through, I'm telling you, a lot of them still slip through the cracks. And it's not so much a slipping through the cracks. Let me tell you what happened is that when a lot of the white hate groups, and white supremacists saw that they were losing ground in a lot of the community things, what they decided to do was if you couldn't, beat them, you join them. So what a lot of those guys, and listen, this was a genius move, they became the prosecutors, they became the judges and the police officers. Most of them became police officers and other folks in the community, council people and everything else. So then when people brought complaints to them, they can kind of weigh those complaints based on their own biases, their own experiences, their own value system as to whether or not a person was truly treated wrong or discriminated against or whatever. And so even today, a lot of that same mindset that I witnessed back in the early and mid 80s, I see it today as a law enforcement officer, here's some 27 years later. Some things have changed, but not much. And some things are better, but not much. And I tell you, sometimes the black officers that are on these streets, especially in the larger cities, can be worse than some of the white officers that people are claiming to be racist. Because I'm still trying to find a cure for cooning, but I haven't found it yet.
We got to introduce you to our friend Arnold Sullivan, Uncle Tom. That would be a great.
Arnold.
Yeah, that would be a great one. He has a show called The Uncle Tom Show. He probably goes a little bit farther than you would, but that's okay. I want to ask you about being an intelligence analyst in the Marine Corps. What does that entail? What's going on there?
Well, what I was doing in the Marine Corps, I did country studies, like all of the information about the country, the culture, the weapon systems, and troop morale for like Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I was one of the analysts that did that research, and we gave it to the commanders.
As Desert Storm was going on, you were analyzing how to bring troop morale up, what we could do. Can you tell us, like, what? I mean, not to be silly, but was pornography involved, or anything, or like alcohol, or anything like that?
No. What my job was to do was to learn how to compromise and break the morale of the forces that we were fighting with.
So it was reverse.
Yeah.
Similar to like U.S. airdrops over Japan of normal condoms that were actually extra large. Never heard that story.
They dropping mags in Tokyo, yo.
We airdropped American normal sized condoms that were like huge.
Are you being serious right now? Or are you being facetious?
I'm 100% serious.
Dude, they should have dropped the mags. They should. This is what the rest of the world uses, and this is what you. Anyways, we can't get too sidetracked on that one. But wow, that is funny. So what would you guys wouldn't drop condoms into Iraq? But what would you guys do?
Well, no, we didn't do that. What we did, we studied their weapon systems, and we would find what their vulnerabilities were, and we would exploit those vulnerabilities by sitting in our force recon guys, and our forward artillery units to soften up those targets, so our troops can go in and our Marines can go in and they can take the objective. That's basically what I did, and I would have classes and train troops on. What to look for and how to take down these Iraqi forces, basically.
Was that just hard targets, or did you also like monitor convoys, shipments of munitions, and strike during those exchanges?
Yeah, because most guys, you're not gonna get a guy who's never really or have some conscious about shooting a person and killing them. I mean, nobody wants to do that. So one of the things that we had to do was to condition our men, which was a part of my job, to be comfortable with firing a weapon at these soft targets. And so what you would tell them is that you're neutralizing the equipment. So you're really shooting the equipment that they're wearing and the weapons that they have. You're trying to neutralize the threat. So basically, you have to dehumanize the enemy so the Marine doesn't feel like that he's actually taking a human life. He's actually neutralizing the threat and neutralizing the equipment that soldier's carrying, so it can't be used against him. And that's how they become hardened much faster.
Okay. Two quick. Too quick. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but based on the intelligence that we had, we were justified into going in that. But maybe if we knew what we know now, we wouldn't have gone in. But then again, you probably have more information on what Saddam was doing with his people than the regular general public.
Right. Exactly. And the intel community would know. But, you can't put everything off, out there at one time. I mean, In the military, things are given on a need-to-know basis. So what the troops need to know, you tell them. What they don't need to know or need to know later, you have to make that decision. That's not even my decision. That comes from the commanding officer.
Right, but okay. So I guess give me an opinion in hindsight. Were we justified going into the Iraq War with the evidence of the weapons of mass destruction or lack thereof? Because I mean, you probably know more than I do.
No, that war was about oil and power.
Oh my. Okay. Well, you heard it from an insider here, folks. Jesus Louise. Okay. Wow. So the weapons of mass destruction was a front.
Well, yeah, because if you tell the American people that we're looking for weapons and this guy can destroy you, fear, when you strike fear among folk that don't feel safe anymore, they're liable to go along with you for anything, and when they don't really have the information firsthand and they're relying on their leaders to be upfront and transparent with them about what's really going on, the folks that are getting the information, is only as good as the source that it's coming from. I mean, we all know that there were really no actual weapons of mass destruction found at all. But we do know that after that war was over, that the Bush family owned almost every major oil company in this country.
Wow. So real quick take, do you think the war in Afghanistan was about poppies?
Well, I think that the war in Afghanistan was mainly a civil war because those wars have been going on a long time. That's mainly like a police action. What Afghanistan is, in my opinion, is a perpetual Vietnam. We shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I kind of agree. It's almost like it's an unwinnable war and it's a waste of resources.
Right. But now let me say this. One of the problems with fighting these conflicts is politics. They need to let the generals, those military commanders who assess the situation with their intel, either go in and just annihilate the enemy and take the country and redevelop it under a democratic regime, or leave it alone. When you look at the U.S. history, every country that we've conquered, we've given it back. We built it, and we used American dollars, resources, and blood to do that. You can't say that of Russia. You can't say that of Israel. You can't say that of Germany or no other force that have gone in and forcibly taken land that they've given it back. That's just insane. And the U.S. is the only country that has repeatedly done that. And they risk life and money and resources and everything else. And they spill blood to bring a country.
Yeah, it's called nation rebuilding. It's called nation rebuilding, and it just doesn't work.
No, it does not work.
Huh.
And then try to go back and tell them how to run the country.
It's not our job.
No,
all it leads to is us being seen as the world police, something that everyone is for. We're almost never successful.
Never 100% successful. We have success into doing what we're trying to aim to do, which we kind of get it done, but
we rebuilt Hiroshima, and it's far more prosperous now than it ever was, or maybe even would have been. But
and to go back to
was in it for dropping a nuke, so it doesn't matter. You have
so I want to highlight something that John said about the generals. And I've heard from other Army people that they know where these people are at, and they know what they need to do to annihilate them, like you said. And here comes the T word. It's going to come up a couple times. From what I heard from when Trump got into office, that he relinquished a lot of the power back to the military to go and get these people, which they didn't have. He relinquished some of the power from the executive branch. Just said, "Okay, guys, go do your thing." That's when the mother of all bombs was dropped. Do you have any insight on that?
Well, let me just bring you a very well-known observation, because a lot of folks talk about what Trump is doing and what Trump has allowed, but Notice that now let's go all the way back to George Bush and then come to Trump. When George Bush was in office talking about the weapons of mass destruction, he talked about Saddam Hussein. He talked about a bunch of these other folks that were running around killing folks, beheading them, torturing them, everything else. He never took down those people. He talked about them. He talked about the war on terror, but he never took any of the actual terrorists down. Osama bin Laden was another one. For those years that Bush was in office, they followed him around. They saw him in holes. He made videos and everything. When Obama took office, during his regime, whether he gave the generals the permission to do it or he did it himself as president, he took them out. He went and sought those terrorists out, and he stood up publicly and said, we're going to find these terrorists and we're going to kill them. He made that a public statement, and that's exactly what he did. Now, the ball is in Trump's court, and Trump is saying, okay, well, I'm going to give the power back to these military generals to do what needs to be done, which is great. I think that's great, because here's the thing about, terrorist cells. When you take one leader out, because their networks are not just one leader, they're cells. And so when you take one out, another one comes to power. That's the way it works.
Correct.
And so that's why fighting in those little countries like that, where they've had these blood feuds and these civil wars for 100 years, it's pointless for us to be there. We're either going to go in and take the country and put it under a democratic regime and a flag, or we just need to leave it alone.
Wow, I'd say that's a pretty good response, Alex. Do you have anything Alexander? You have anything to add to that?
For the most part, I think the only is that just don't at all ever, not our business. But I'm okay with his response. I think that's a very logical and well thought out response. Personally, I don't think that there's ever reason, unless provoked personally, that we should be involved in other countries' affairs. But that's a matter of personal opinion.
But look, listen, Alex has an excellent point, because let me tell you, the reason that tyranny abounds in those countries is because it goes back, to what the Japanese emperor said after Pearl Harbor was attacked. His admirals went to him and said, listen, while we have the Americans vulnerable, let's go ahead and send in this third wave and finish them off. And the emperor said, no, we no longer have the element of surprise. He said, we're not going to do that, because they wanted to attack the U.S. mainland. And that emperor said that if we send our forces to attack the U.S. mainland, there'll be a rifle behind every blade of grass. So in other words,
an alleged quote.
Well,
that's an alleged quote.
But listen though. But there's a truism in that, because tell me how many times by an invading force that the U.S. mainland has been attacked. The U.S. mainland by an invading force. I'm not talking about planes. I'm not talking about missiles. I'm talking about an invading force. Let me tell you what my solution is to a lot of these countries that live under this tyranny. Arm the citizens. Because the way that these guys can come in, especially in those African countries, and run ripshot over those women and make them slaves and all that, because they're the only ones with the guns. The thugs are the only ones that have the guns. When you arm your citizenry, I guarantee you that ruckus stops, because you don't know that if you attack someone, if you're going to walk away from it unscathed.
Yeah,
sometimes the bullets work.
An armed society. However, that brings up a really interesting question, particularly for someone advocating. What do you think of Indiana's regarding home defense?
Well, I heard
Indiana, an unconstitutional warrantless raid. You can shoot police officers, and if they enter your home illegally. What are your thoughts?
Well, let me tell you the problem with that. How do you know that the officer entered the home illegally if he has a warrant? See, that's ridiculous. And some of these legislators need to be thrown out.
This is regarding knock raids. This is regarding knock raids. So raiding a home, presence. And the reason the last time that this happened, they raided the wrong house.
Right.
With a no-knock raid, didn't announce their presence, so the guy had no clue that it was police officers, and he opened fire. If police don't announce themselves,
Hey, Alex, you've turned robotic on us for a little bit. We couldn't hear you.
I said that.
Hold on, this is something I want to bring up. I have this pegged a little bit further down the line, so maybe your internet connection will be better, and we'll dive into this with a little more detail. So, when did you become police chief? Of what city? I can't. Benkelman?
That was in a town called Tacoma, Nebraska, right?
Okay.
And that was about 2014, 2014. I took over as the interim chief. The chief of police left. He got into a business. He became an entrepreneur and opened up a gym, and he left the department. So I was appointed by the council as the interim chief.
Oh wow! So it wasn't even like your decision. There's like this is what you're going to do.
Right, exactly. And I served, and at the time I didn't want to stay because they wanted me to be the chief, but I knew I was going to go. I wanted to go back to San Diego eventually, so I told them that I would serve until they found a new chief. And once I started serving as chief, though, they wasn't even looking. They just left me there. So I had to remind them after about nearly a year. I said, you guys are supposed to be looking for another chief. And so they did. And I stayed as the assistant chief and helped to train that chief in the community and just show them the ropes, because they hired a chief from Oakland, Nebraska, who came in and took over. And he's doing a great job. He's doing a great job there right now. And I went to San Diego and got into some business ventures there. And then eventually, after 6 years, decided to come back to Nebraska.
San Diego is beautiful, though, right?
Oh yeah,
San Diego. What are the duties of a police chief compared to a sergeant or something like that? What do they do? What do they oversee?
Well, the chief is more of the administrator, and what he does, he's a policymaker. So when there's time for an officer discipline, like a sergeant or lieutenant or someone may initiate the discipline, but it's the chief that makes the ultimate decision as to what the final disposition of that discipline will be. If it's a smaller department, then the chief does all of that. But the chief also handles the budget and the budgeting for the department, and he does all of the new requisitions and the acquisitions for the department. And so that's primarily his job. It's mostly administrative, although in smaller departments, the chief can be the jack of all trades and do everything. He even works the street in a uniform just like a regular officer. But smaller town police chiefs are much more on hands and interactive with the community than large police chiefs are. Like, I bet you in Los Angeles, you won't meet too many people that say, oh, the chief came down and patrolled our neighborhood and shook my hand, or the chief wrote me a speeding ticket. That's not unheard of. But in a town where Alexander lives, but he said that it's not incorporated, so he probably have a sheriff's department.
I have sheriffs.
Actually patrolling it. Yeah. So
I know the name.
Yeah, so you'll have the sheriff and his deputies doing that. And by the way, the only actual recognized law enforcement under our Constitution is an elected sheriff and U.S. Marshals.
Well, don't tell people that. You're going to get them too much confidence to try and fight these police officers.
Well, some of these police officers need to be fought for the thuggish things that they do. But that being said, you should comply to avoid problems. But I'm just letting you know that these departments better start training these guys in community-based policing, because this stuff is going to come to a head after a while. And we're looking at a pending implosion of our culture and society when it comes to law enforcement. This stuff is just ridiculous. These guys, a lot of them have no business doing the things to people that they do, because they wouldn't. Because if the shoe was on the other foot, they wouldn't want to be treated like that.
Correct. No, and I think a very important thing to note is that many of them feel entitled, and they forget that they're public servants, that they are paid out of the taxpayer's dime, and that they are public servants. They're there to serve. And a lot of them get a big head about a badge. I'm not saying they all do. I've met amazing police officers who have a really community-based mentality. They get to know you, recognize you on the street, say hello. But then there are others that just go into the job with an aggro sense of like this hierarchical power granted to them by
Right.
divines.
Couldn't you also say that the job of being a police officer has been completely demonized by the media and by activist groups to where they almost can do no right anymore?
No, I
disagree.
What I think that the police officers have been demonized by themselves, and now because a lot of the stuff that you see going on has been going on all along. It's just that social media, because it's become so widely available and it's everywhere that we actually see it. It's why the public is so outraged by it. Not that it hasn't been happening all the time. Just like during the civil rights movement, once the news media started world broadcasting the civil rights atrocities that were going on in America, that's when the law changed. And when the outcry, not just from cities and states, but from the world, was how in the world can you call yourself a civilized democratic society and you're treating a segment of your own people like that? That's when things really, really began to change. And I think that the media, while I think they sensationalize these things, but notice this, there's some things that happen that the media doesn't even report on until someone posts it on Facebook and it goes viral, so it can't be ignored anymore. Then the media reports on it because it's already out there publicly.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's why you see a lot of opposition to filming. You'll see police officers arrest people for filming them at their job as public servants.
But even given the current climate of what is the relationship between police officers and civilians, wouldn't it be a good idea as a civilian not to say that the police officer is right or wrong, to comply and avoid being shot or being brutalized?
Yes, you should comply and then complain, because not that the complaining might do any good depending on where you are, because in a small town your complaint might get some attention and you may get some satisfaction. If you're an officer in Los Angeles, for example, and you complain, then you wrote a nice statement on a piece of paper and that's about as far as it may go. So it all depends on the situation. But yes, to avoid escalating a situation, if the officer says, put your hands behind your back, take your hands out of your pocket, or get on your knees and lay your face down on the ground, if you comply and they pounce on you, now there's a huge issue with that officer. But if you resist, even if the officer is talking to you and you're standing there saying things back, even on social media, folks come in and make comments like, well, why don't they just lay down or put their hands behind the back? Why are they resisting? So while the officer is escalating the situation, the citizen is usually escalating the situation as well. And so it gets somewhere where it shouldn't go. So yeah, comply and then complain. That's what you should do to the authority and to the mayor and to the county attorney or to the district attorney. That's what you should complain to.
I typically find the best course of action is if a police officer has infringed on your rights to a degree in which you can say that they have broken the law themselves, action against them. Because the biggest issue of corruption right now is the police not policing themselves. You see nepotism, and you see officers who are given slaps on the wrist for crimes that if normal everyday people committed, they would land years behind bars.
Yeah, but you know what? I wasn't one of those kind of police chiefs or an assistant chief, because if I found that an officer was unfit, he was gone. He was gone. And even right now, if I see something in the field that an officer is doing, I'm not going to stand there and watch him because he's my friend or he's my coworker or he's whatever. A Marine on duty has no friends, and I'm sworn to protect the public. against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So what I will do, if I see a fellow officer beating a person or going above board or being excessive, then I'm going to pull him back. But not only will I stop him, I'm going to report him. And then I'm going to push the issue to make sure that he doesn't put on a uniform and a badge again.
But that's not common.
It isn't
And
common,
that's the
but
issue.
that's what needs to be done. But that's what needs to be done.
Okay, I totally respect you for that, but I feel as an outsider that I need to make a couple of observations that especially with, and it's still, even if it's social media that's calling us out, this job is being demonized. It's making it unattractive for anybody to want to do. Most people don't want to do it. It's a hard job. Mm-hmm. And you could probably relate to how stressful it could be and the stress of dealing with people that just want to lie to you all day long, and you're pretty much dealing with the worst people that society has to offer. That could kind of take an emotional toll on you. And I'm not saying that police officers have to be absolutely perfect, because I think some of us hold them to a standard that they are superhumans, which they are not. They're just human beings like me, or well, more so you. And we're expected them to do these extraordinary things, which most people aren't able to do. And this goes back to my comment that I've stressed a lot, that police officers need better training before you give them a gun and a badge and tell them to go deal with the worst part of society.
Right,
Travis, you're missing a lot of really key cases. Like, I don't think that someone under stress from handling the worst of, I've had some pretty negative interactions with police, and I don't consider myself the worst of society. I follow the law.
Yeah, that's not your job that you do
whether
40
I
hours
agree
a
with
week
it or not.
all day long. That's not what you do all day long.
But what I'm saying is, I don't think you can excuse an officer shooting a man in the back for
and everything
being
needs
stressed on the job.
That's a case by case basis. That was a bad one. I think the guy grabbed his taser though.
These officers are pulling their guns when it's entirely unnecessary.
But if a suspect grabs an officer's taser or even his baton, he is trained to shoot to take down that suspect.
I'm not talking about any specific case. So
well, you pretty much brought the Walter Scott. That was pretty much.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about there have been other cases where police have shot people in the back.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
And the law here is if you shoot someone in the back, you're going to prison because you murdered them. It does not matter if they're in your house. Does not matter where they are. If you shoot them in the back, you are a murderer. You're going to prison. Does not matter. That's correct. That's not the standard that police are held.
Okay, and just to go back to
if a private security guard did that to someone, they would go to prison.
You just cut out, so I'm going to cut in. Where I found John was on a thread where these cops had to deal with an incredibly violent, incredibly strong person, and so I just want and it's like, do I want that? Do I want to deal with that shit? No. You have to be a certain type of person to be able to want to deal with that kind of. I mean, whatever you want to deal with that.
Infinity.
So I'm gonna play this video so we can all see it, because this is crazy.
I'm seeing myself for infinity.
Can you guys see it? John, can you see the video?
Yeah. Yep, I see it.
So this guy, I mean, clearly PCP, or there's that bath salts. Now, maybe you can give us a play-by-play, John, on what these officers are trying to do and what's going on here. So he attacks Okay, yeah, that's what I want to do when I go to work.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but see, this guy is kind of slapping the officer around or trying to with empty hands, and the officer sees that. So the guy hasn't produced the weapon. So the first officer is kind of assessing the situation. He's seeing that the guy's obviously got some kind of mental illness or he's on some type of drug, right? Now, I don't understand that why at this point, if the officer had a taser just wouldn't tase him. However, you got to understand that when a person is high on drugs like that, a taser does nothing but aggravates them, and it usually won't even take them down because the nervous system has already been compromised, and that's what a taser attacks. It's the central nervous system. So in most cases like that, the officer probably realizes that. So the officer's there, kind of dancing with the guy. He sees him, he's running away from him, just kind of keeping him at bay. But the guy's not armed, right? So that officer's buying time until his backup arrives. That's actually what he's doing. He's waiting for his backup. And then when backup arrives, he figured that, okay, we can take him down because this guy is on something. He's stronger than I am. I don't want to hurt him. I don't want him to hurt me. I don't want him to grab my weapon, my taser, my baton, or whatever, because he's not armed. You can see he's not armed. His pants are down around his ankle. And then other officers arrive. They see the guy on the ground. They are obviously he's not armed. Now, they haven't had a chance to assess him like the first officer has, but obviously from the training and experience, they should know that something's wrong with this guy. Now, there's enough of him right there. While he's on the ground, I don't understand why they just wouldn't grab him, handcuff him, and restrain him while he was already on the ground.
But then he gets back up.
See, and every time an officer tries to grab his arm to handcuff him, he starts kicking and flailing around, and then he gets back up.
So here comes the part that a lot of people have a problem with, and because they start beating him. And what's your take on that?
Well, but he's fighting, he's flaying around. But a person on drugs, high up on drugs like that, it's going to be pretty doggone strong. But it was enough of them to just pounce on him and just hold him down until he can be handcuffed. There were enough. I mean, they didn't have to punch him in the face and do all of that and physically beat him up. Not with that many officers there. And if that was the case, then several of them should have tried at least tasing him. I don't see where that was the case. And see if that would have incapacitated him in any way whatsoever. I doubt it though. Because when a person is that high on drugs, especially
he was on Sherm probably, right?
Right. And so if he's high up on those kind of things, a taser's not going to do any good. It's just going to really, really aggravate him.
All right, since we're on this is a popular video going on right now that happened in a Milwaukee mall, which the Black Panthers are involved with now. And I'm going to ask you a little bit about that because you seem to have been. So from what I can see is in the beginning of the video, he seems to be resisting and yelling, but then the cops do some egregious use of authority. I'll push play now. I mean, that right hook just came so fast. But he's still not complying. I mean, that goes into that gray area of where do you comply or do you fight back?
Right, but listen, officers are trained in empty hand techniques. See how they got him on the ground? That guy could have took his thumb and put it behind his ear and put him into a pain compliance. Yeah, strike him to the face. And with both of the officers there, instead of hitting him in the face to take him to the ground, he could have did a leg sweep and swept him to the ground. The other officer followed him down to the ground, flipped him over, and then handcuffed him. Or, in that case, tased him. That's a state trooper. You can't tell me that a state trooper in any state doesn't have a taser.
So there's a mall security guard there, and then I guess you called it as a state trooper.
Right. And it looks like the mall security guard there was the one that struck him in the face.
Yeah, that's the one that I'll send you the video when we're done. But there's a it looks like he's from the original Black Panthers, and he's got a group of them, and they go to this mall, which is in Wauwatosa in Wisconsin, and now they're threatening to disrupt and do stuff like that.
But what good is that going to do?
Right.
Not.
And we're back.
It's just it'll just ignite more tensions between accomplish absolutely nothing positive and maintain a vicious circle of violence. But oh well, that's how people solve things.
In big cities. That's what we were just talking about earlier.
That's why I relocated prior to being in nowhere, middle of nowhere in the mountains. I was near Sacramento, so it was a city. The small city I lived in was about as big as Lincoln.
Yeah.
So
which in a city that size you can still have some anonymity, which still enjoy kind of a small town feel, but it's really not a small town. But it's not a big city either.
It's a lot of inner bullshit I wanted to get away from, and I like owning guns, so it's kind of a double whammy.
Right. Yeah, because and what's really funny about California is that the sheriff in San Diego won't approve hardly any concealed carry permits, but if you go up north, you can get them from those sheriffs. It's just amazing how that works.
Well, what I find in California with some of the strictest gun laws in America is one of the few open carry states left as well.
Oh, and look at Chicago. That's a perfect example of place with strict gun laws. And Darian Parlick is going to be so mad that he could not join us. Maybe when if we get the lady that John recommended for us, we'll get Darian Parlick in that episode. We can have a Chicago / so I think we've covered policing enough. And Alex, I'm gonna have to keep going here because we're running low on time. John Carter is actually running for mayor of a city in Nebraska. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm in Benkelman, Nebraska, and I'm actually running for mayor in this town. That is correct.
What's it called?
No, Benkelman.
How do you spell it?
It's Benkelman.
Okay. On your social media page, I think you should put that up front. Maybe we can help you a little bit out with social media. Okay. Because I went to your page and I couldn't find it. It didn't say anywhere on the front.
Well, yeah. I actually have a Facebook page called John Carter for mayor.
Yeah, that's the one that I'm referring to. It should be like right there, Benkelman. You know what I mean? It should be. Okay. It should be stated like that should be first and foremost. Because I couldn't really find it. Maybe we can help you out with some social media type of stuff. But so who's the current mayor? Who are you running against? And what kind of vision do you have for your city?
Well, the current mayor, Dallas Chartier, is no longer running. So the guy that I beat, I beat the other contenders in the primary that I'm running against now. His name is Bob Rose. He's a veteran. He's a former veterinarian, a retired veterinarian here. And one of the things that I want to do is to bring a solar manufacturing plant to Benkelman to increase jobs. But the other thing it will do, it will lower the average utility bill from an average of $200 a month down to somewhere between $38 and $50 a month. Those are some of the key things that I want to do. I also want to bring 15 new businesses here through some grant sourcing, from the tobacco companies, because what a lot of cities don't know is that there's money available from the tobacco companies for folks that want to open up storefront businesses, and they'll give you up to $150,000 to do that if the business that you open create jobs. And in smaller communities where Alexander is, for example, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA, in cities under 5,000, will set aside $25 million or will fund up to $25 million for anybody that wants to build like a huge enterprise that'll create jobs, or if a person wants to buy a house and don't have the down payment money, or if they need to fix up a house or build a home, USDA, believe it or not, is the fiscal agent for the U.S. government that will do that for people who live in cities under 5,000 people.
Huh. Wow, that's pretty interesting.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's technically considered a city, though. It's what's a census designated place.
What, your place? Yeah, because it has to be
A census designated place.
yeah. So you have to be either an incorporated village or a town, and if you go to the USDA website, it gives you all of the information about all the different things that they fund. And there's a lot of things that the public just don't know, but it's for rural areas. That money is for the development of rural areas.
Oh, where I'm at is pretty damn rural.
You are the go-to reference for a small town now, Alexander.
It's not a town, it's a census designated place.
Yeah, it's a census designated place. Well, see, like I'm
city
like
limits.
Alexander. I was in California, but I came back to Nebraska because I like guns. I like owning guns. There's a gun shop that I just recently opened. And here in Nebraska, it's an open carry state, and it's easy to get a concealed carry permit. All you have to do is just go to the class and pay $100. And people can even, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. And people can even, under certain circumstances, own fully automatic weapons here in this state.
Oh, wow.
And in a lot of jurisdictions like California, you can't do that because there's so many AR-15s out here. Because I can get and build an AR-15 for a person for just under $300, because the average AR-15 that you can buy here in Nebraska is around $299. So in a lot of other states, it's not like that, because this is a very gun-friendly state. It's very gun-friendly.
That's cool.
And as a police officer, I'm just go back to say this: about 98% of the people that I stop on a daily basis are armed. I haven't been shot at. I haven't been assaulted. So this myth about if you arm people is going to create a big threat to police officers, only if the police officer is a jackass. Because in my 27 years of working in these small rural communities, and even some of the larger cities where they're not armed, but in these smaller communities where the majority of the citizens are armed, I've never had an armed encounter on a traffic stop with the driver that I pulled over that had rifles, shotguns, and pistols in the car. Never in 27 years.
Right. And when they do in bigger cities, they are they're very dangerous people, and it goes back to policing in a major city where you can get some cartel member or some high-level gang member or somebody that's got a couple strikes against them, given the California felony laws that
Right.
I ain't going back,
Right.
I feel like we were maybe just a tad little bit too harsh on policing it, and I thought you might be a little bit more reluctant to have the police officers back, just to highlight that it's like a thankless job that no one really wants to do, but they should be held. They are officers of the law, and they should be held to a very high standard.
Absolutely.
I just my big problem with them is the media. It's they don't report the white kids that get caught. They just report the black kids.
Yeah, that's true.
The black kids that get killed. I mean, there's way more white kids that get killed by cops than there is black kids. Yeah. But they'll focus on these certain couple ones, and then all of a sudden Baltimore is burning down. It's like,
because they're sensationalized. You're right.
Yeah, it's definitely sensationalized. I think that you're being myopic as well, Travis, because you're trying to excuse a lot of things. If we hold officers accountable, not
no. Well, I'm only hearing part of what you're saying, but I treat every case as on an individual basis, and there are plenty of cops that make terrible decisions, and and I want them held accountable. There's a couple this year alone that have gotten off where there's not even, and here's another point, and we're getting close to the end here, and here's another thing that I've had in my brain on why that these officers get off with no not an investigation, but no like court trial. So if there was a court trial that would go on and it would drag on, the media would cover it, and then these officers get off, and then what happens? You get riots after that. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I think that some of these, as much as I was like, my first impression is that I want these cops to be formally tried, and I want, not just an investigation, but I want them brought up on charges so we could really figure this thing out. But what ends up happening after that is a drawn out court case where the anger gets built up, and then you have a civilian reaction to that. Am I on course with something? Because that's something I came up with on my own on why they're not brought up on charges.
Well, yeah, and some of them are not brought up on charges just because of the community and the people that's out there trying to prosecute them. But that's a whole nother segment that we can do later. But should the bad ones be put off the departments? Absolutely. And usually when they bring that kind of attention to the department, even when they are exonerated, their careers as law enforcement officers are pretty much over at that point anyway.
Yeah, and then the vacation with pay really rubs people the wrong way.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Mr. Alexander, you got anything to add before we go? There was one. All right, I gotta ask this question for Darian in closing. Darian wanted to ask you about civilian militias carrying the load, and maybe like getting some kind of formal police officer training and overseeing the civilian militias and civilians carrying with no permits and open carry and stuff like that. Do you think that would be? It was probably not an answer for a big city, but what do you think about that? Civilians trying to pretty much govern themselves.
Well, see, the Constitution says that the last line of defense for this democracy is an elected county sheriff. What the Constitution teaches us is that if our representative government goes rogue and becomes a tyranny, then the elected sheriffs are tasked with forming posses or militias and arming them to fight against that tyranny. That's actually what they're supposed to do. Now, an elected sheriff can have a posse. Some of the smaller towns do. They may not talk about it, but those posse members train with the deputy sheriffs. Now, a posse member is not a certified law enforcement officer. What he is that he trains with those deputies and with the sheriff's department and even with federal law enforcement for armed responses to like a school shooting or a manhunt or anything like that, where the sheriff's office may be understaffed in smaller communities to handle something that requires a large response, and it's going to take troopers and everyone too long to get there. And so I'm all for that. And that's something that we do in these small communities here in Nebraska, is that there are a lot of militia groups around here, and they don't give us problems. I'm telling you, we don't have problems with them. But I tell you one thing, if something were to happen, me even being a black man, I would rather run up and befriend a lot of these militia guys, because I know that hanging out with them, nothing's going to happen to me or my family. Nothing.
Wow, that was a beautiful answer. I'm sure Darian's going to be stoked about that. Alexander, you got anything to add? Is he there?
I'm just looking forward to seeing how this mayoral election goes. I think
when's the vote?
Pretty closely.
Is it in November or is it sooner?
No, I just got through the primary, and I'm going to get through November 3rd. However, remember now that in the town where I live, in this county, there are about 2,800 folks that live in this county. Only 4 of us are black.
Oh,
right.
Hey.
But if they're able to hear this, hear you talk on this episode about the city and and hear you, in a long form interview. That's how you get to know somebody.
Yeah, but see, I'm going to go back to something that Alexander said first too. Now, I'm a people person, and I have a lot of folks here that are on my side, that are down for me here, so to speak. But here's the fact: if I am elected as mayor on November 3rd in Benkelman, Nebraska, Lincoln and Omaha, as you said earlier, Alexander, is the most ethnically diverse. Those are ethnically diverse and mostly populated cities in Nebraska. So if I'm elected here, that's going to be something, because I will be the first person of color ever in the history of this state to be elected as mayor of any city.
Damn.
State. There has never been a person of color elected as mayor in any city in this state ever.
You know what? What we're going to do for you is we're going to make it.
Audio will come.
We're going to make an
I don't know if
edited.
my audio will come through clearly.
We're going to make an edited video for you of just what you said about running for mayor, and we'll give it to you to put on your Facebook page.
Okay.
Certainly.
And maybe a couple other ones.
I think it's important to note that I really don't give a shit what color you are. I don't think that your color comes into play for how I personally will vote.
Right.
Ultimately, I think you're, and this is hard for me to say, police officer, but obviously your views are very rooted in what the police are supposed to do. So on issues alone, I think that I haven't seen your opponent, but I think you're someone who's very electable.
Right.
So if you do make history, if you do make Nebraska history, that's really cool. But to me, that takes a sideline to the importance of your policy that you want to put in place, which to me is well thought out. Because ultimately, making history is nothing compared to having satisfied, citizens who are like, wow, I got a great mayor. Oh, BT Dubs, he's also black.
Right. And I agree with that 100%, Alexander, because look, in the solar manufacturing plant that I'm doing, do you know what the starting salary is? It's $18.50 an hour with full medical and dental benefits.
In Nebraska, that is huge. That's huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
Because do you know what the mortgage is on a 3-bedroom house in this city?
Probably about 500
square foot. A 2,000 square foot 3-bedroom house mortgage, principal and interest is $241 a month.
Wow.
All right, I'm moving to Nebraska.
Yeah.
Everyone needs electricians.
We'll be up there shortly.
Everyone needs electricians.
The girl and I were looking for somewhere to go. I think we found it.
Okay, well, man, this has been great. John Carter, definitely want to check in with you again in the future, especially if there's like a big police matter. I want to check in with your mayor, or maybe even some current events. I would love to talk to you at any time. You just consider it an open invitation anytime you want to come on to Mercury's cast.
Okay, appreciate it.
Alexander, any closing?
Alexander, thank you, man.
Any closing thoughts? We have a catchphrase at the end. Hopefully, we can get you to say it.
Hopefully. Just John, stick around after the show for a second, and can't remember the catchphrase. So
yeah, you can.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Spoken like a true millennial.
Where there's a will, there's a way. where there's a will, there's a way. Don't piss up a rope.
Okay. Alexander, go ahead and give it to him. All right, John Carter, can you tell the listeners to step their game up?
Step the game up. Step the game up and stand up and be counted, because these are some of the most important days of your life, and you need to stand up and stand for something, because if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Damn, that was the best catchphrase line in Mercury history out of 83 episodes.
Love that line too. If you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything is one of my all-time favorite catchphrases. So you know what? Step your game up.
All right, everybody else that didn't hear it the first two times, step your game up, and we are out.